based on your review of that, am I correct in believing that the Red Star surveillance video was collected and given to Moscow Police Department?
It reads that way, yes, ma'am.
Where is it?
I do not know.
Who do I ask where it is?
That would be through the evidence custodian and MPD. That'd be my best direction for you.
So I need to go to the evidence custodian and ask him to bring all of the videos out so I can watch them all to see if that one exists.
Yes, ma'am.
How many hours of videotape do you think have been collected?
A lot.
Thousands?
Yes, easily.
Detective Payne, I want to look at Defendant's Exhibit SS now. Don't put RR away. I think we might go back there in just a minute. But SS, if I can draw your attention to paragraph 1.
Okay.
Would I be correct in believing that I should be able to have a videotape from a place called Monday's Machine?
Yes, ma'am.
Where's Monday's Machine?
I don't know where Monday's Machine is, ma'am. It does not sound familiar to me.
Can you see the address that's also listed in paragraph 1?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that help you know where Monday's Machine might be?
It'd be south of Moscow city limits if memory serves, but that's the best I can recall.
You don't know where this particular numbered address on South Main might be?
No, ma'am.
Well, let's go back to, let me ask you this. Who do I ask where that video is?
Restate what I did before is go through the evidence custodian at Moscow PD.
Let's go back to RR for a minute. And if you can turn with me to page 4. I'll draw your attention to paragraph number 21, particularly subparts B, C, D, and G. Do you see where I'm talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
And there, we're talking about 4 different businesses all within the city of Moscow. Is that right?
That is correct.
And those are on Main Street in Moscow. Is that also right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And if I read the first sentence in that paragraph, am I correct in believing that Moscow Police Department should be in possession of all of those videos?
It reads that way, yes, ma'am.
Where are they?
I would have to direct you to the video that have been turned into the evidence lab at Moscow PD.
I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to move from videos now, and I want to talk a little bit about affidavits and search warrants that you wrote.
Can I ask a question? You're not asking to admit these exhibits?
You know, Your Honor, I haven't.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I haven't. The court has those in a pre-filing to put the court and counsel on notice of things we talk about. I'm not going to ask that these be admitted this way. Detective Payne didn't write them, but he's familiar with the content. So I think I have your questions answered. Thank you. Let's talk about affidavits and search warrants for a minute. Did you author affidavits in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you use affidavits you authored in support of search warrants to obtain information that you wanted to take a look at?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you author the affidavit that was used for the arrest warrant for Bryan Kohberger?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you rely on when you wrote these affidavits?
Be more specific.
Yes, let's focus on the affidavit for the AT&T records. There were 2 search warrants on December 23rd, 2022. Are you with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so let's talk about those search warrants and the affidavit. First, the affidavit. What did you rely on in the affidavit you wrote for the first AT&T search warrant on December 23rd, 2022?
It was a conglomerate of interviews, data received from cell phones, my observations of some surveillance footage that was taking place, various other things. Go down the line. If you could be more specific on specific parts, I'd be happy to tell you what I'd like.
Okay. There was a part of the affidavit where you talked about WSU officers identifying white Lawerence.
Yes, ma'am.
And there was a part of the affidavit where you talked about 2011 to 2013 Elantras, and then it expanded to 2016 to include the year of 2016 Elantras.
Yes, ma'am.
What I want to know first is what you relied on to expand that search from 2013 to include 14, 15, and 16.
That information was provided to FBI Special Agent Imel. He's a vehicle identification specialist. He used snapshots from the previously mentioned surveillance videos, and that was his determination on the types of vehicles we should be looking for, rather the year range we should look for. It would be in his report, we'd be more specific, but that was what I based the affidavit off of, that portion of it.
I understand as far as when we get to 2013, but when we go beyond that, what did you rely on to get beyond that?
It would have been his input as an expert in vehicle identification. That's what we relied on.
Part of your affidavit talks about WSU officers finding white Elantras. And I believe there was an officer that you had some communication with. Do you recall the date you had that communication?
I do not recall the date.
Did you have some messaging system exchange with this officer to talk about that?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the only means of communication you had with this officer?
No, ma'am. I believe I spoke to him on the telephone as well.
When you spoke to him on the telephone, how did that relate to the date of the messaging?
It would have likely been, if memory serves, it would likely been that same day.
Okay. Does December 20th, 2022 sound familiar to you?
Yes, ma'am.
And so this conversation with this officer from Washington, it related backwards to when he noticed an Elantra, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
But when he noticed it, you didn't know about that yet. Is that also correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so you don't know about him or talk to him until December 20th, 2022, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In your affidavits, did you rely on cell phone information and cell phone location information?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you work with cell phone records yourself?
No, ma'am.
Did you see cell phone records yourself?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
When was the first time you saw cell phone records that were attributed to Bryan Kohberger?
I do not remember what date that was.
Well, maybe you can give me an estimate. We know on the 20th, you're talking to WSU about an observation from a month before. And we know on December 23rd, you're asking for AT&T warrants for information. Can you narrow
That's
it
a
down?
yes.
Sorry, Judge.
That's a yes. You can, I just want to get the record. Yes.
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
So between those 2 days, does that help you identify the first time you saw cell phone records related to Bryan Kohberger?
Memory serves, the first time I saw any cell phone records related to Bryan Kohberger was after we received the return from the first search warrant.
Just to be sure I'm tracking with you, when you say the return from the first search warrant, we're talking about the first AT&T warrant.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that right?
That's correct.
And in that warrant, you were seeking 48 hours worth of records, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if I call those the 48-hour records, we'll both be on the same page?
Yep.
All right. you wrote your second AT&T warrant for a much longer period of phone records that same day, December 23rd, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
How far ahead of that warrant did you see the records?
It would have been upon the receipt of the 48-hour records that came in from AT&T. Immediately after receiving those, I began writing that second section of the second AT&T warrant for the longer period. If that makes sense.
It does. So you get these records and you take a look at them and you start writing your warrant. Is that right?
The records were provided to FBI Special Agent Lawerence, who began deciphering them. I'm not an expert in cell phone records.
That was the next thing I was going to ask you.
So, no, ma'am, I'm not. So, he was the one who was conveying that information to me so I could understand what it was.
So do you get the records and then get them to him somehow?
Yes, ma'am.
The records do they go directly to Lawerence?
I do not recall what the distribution was on the return itself. I do not recall that.
Are you and Lawerence exchanging emails about these records?
No, ma'am. Not that I remember.
How did you get them to them?
We were co-located. At the time, Detective Lawerence was at the Moscow Police Department about 30 feet down the hallway.
Are the two of you exchanging text messaging during this time?
I do not remember if you texted during that time.
I may have a record that would refresh your memory. I'm certainly not seeking to have these admitted, but I'd like to hand him some records to see if we can refresh his memory. Do you recognize what's been placed in front of you?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Okay. Does reading the content of some December 23rd messages refresh your recollection about participating in text messages with Nicholas Lawerence?
It really does not, ma'am.
Will you look at, there's 3 separate stapled documents. Will you move that one and go to the next one?
Still on December 23rd?
Yeah.
I do vaguely remember that exchange, the one at the top of this second.
Is that the one that starts with you identifying yourself?
No, ma'am, it starts with the message says, group text for this weekend, Maria, Nick, Ed, Brett, and Darren.
You look at that third one.
Seems vaguely familiar.
Okay. So just so I'm clear then, Nick Lawerence is at Moscow Police Department when you're getting, on December 23rd, when you're getting these 2 warrants. Is that right?
If memory serves, that's correct.
Okay. Well, you told me that you're not the guy who understands how to interpret these records. Do you know anything about cell phone towers?
Very little, ma'am.
Okay. So when you wrote this second AT&T warrant, you have possession of Bryan Kohberger's call detail records or AT&T records, but you don't know what they mean, so you're relying on somebody else.
Yes, ma'am.
Who all did you rely on?
Mainly it was Special Agent Lawerence. He was my main point of contact for understanding what was going on.
Okay. In fact, in your affidavit for the second AT&T report, there's a couple of maps in there. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And one of them has some video camera information. That's the first map. Where did that come from?
I do not recall. If you have a copy of it, I can refresh my memory and tell you.
I bet I do. I have what we've marked defendants B.
Are you referring to there's two maps, the WSU focused map you're referring to? It's completely washed out on this copy. I can't even see what it is.
It's hard to see, isn't it? What I want to know is what you relied on to get that first one that talks about WSU and the cameras of WSU. So where'd you get that?
Yes, ma'am. So Special Agent Rob Hilley with the FBI was also co-located with us. He was tasked with analyzing that video from WSU and the surrounding area. So it was a conversation between he and I, pointing out areas of locations where the car was likely seen on surveillance footage. And that's what I relied upon to create that map.
So you created that map how?
Through PowerPoint, I believe, ma'am. Memory serves.
You saved your work on that?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's go to the next map. That one would appear to be a trail or a path from south of Moscow back towards Lewiston or back towards Polk. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you get that map?
Same thing. It was just created using open source satellite imagery, and I think it was PowerPoint.
Did you create that?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you get the information to draw that trail?
So that was used from the cell phone records referred to me by Special Agent Balance on his interpretation of possible places where someone could have driven between the location that starts there and then back to Pullman.
So you did this on some open source mapping, not anything from Nick Balance creating a visual for you.
No, ma'am. I did view a draft report from Special Agent Balance to help me conceptualize this, but it did not look like this map.
Where's that draft report?
It is, best of my knowledge, it's already been provided to the prosecutor's office through the FBI channels.
Is this the lengthy past draft report or is it a different draft report?
Well, it would have to be the draft cast report. That's the only cast report I'm aware of from Special Agent Balance.
So on December 23rd, are you saying you looked at this past draft report to make that map that went into your affidavit to get the second set of records?
Yes, ma'am.
The one that was given to us in July of last year?
I don't know when you got it.
How many versions of that cast draft report have you seen?
I have only seen that one, ma'am. That's the only one I'm aware of.
All right. And from the FBI, we have Agent Balance and Agent Hilley at Moscow Police Department with you. Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
and all of this work is done with verbal communication, is that right?
The majority of it, yes, ma'am.
And Nick Balance's cast draft report.
Correct.
And I think Special Agent Imel's vehicle identification.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let's talk about what you were seeking to get in this. Well, let me ask this before I leave the second search warrant. Is there anything else you relied on to obtain that second search warrant to compose your affidavit?
Like I said earlier, we relied on cell phone records from surviving roommates as well as the victims. We relied on interviews with the two surviving roommates that were present at the time. We relied on the surveillance footage, cell phone data. I'd have to go paragraph by paragraph, but that's what jumps to mind.
Of those things, are you relying on other people's work to put that all together?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now I'm ready to talk about the things that same day as the first one. And was there anything else from AT&T that you saw or relied on to get the second one off the ground?
No, ma'am.
And in the first AT&T search warrant, are you aware that part of the request was for timing advance reports?
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, that also appears in your second search warrant request, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And not only do you ask for the timing advance reports from AT&T, you ask for them from several other companies, correct? Verizon's version of it, T-Mobile's version. of this kind of timing advance report. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. When was the first time you saw AT&T's timing advance report?
I do not recall when I first saw it.
Where is it?
To the best of my knowledge, all of that information from those returns has been provided to the prosecutor's office.
If I tell you I don't have a timing advance report or any from the other phone companies, where do I look for them?
I would direct you back to the prosecutor's office. Everything that Moscow PD received, in that realm, we have turned over to my knowledge.
But you know you've seen this report, is that right?
I do not recall if I've seen the timing advance reports. I'd have to see what it even looked like to know if I'd seen it.
Do you know what it is?
Not particularly. I'm no expert.
Okay. You wrote the search warrant though, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, how did you get the language for that if you don't know what this is?
So there's no secret that I rely heavily on people who are very highly educated in these topic areas to write this search warrant. So that language was likely conveyed to me through people who know much more than myself about cell phone data.
Who are those people?
Like I said, FBI agent Balance and Detective Mowery were probably my two main points of contact for helping me with that language.
During the course of your investigation and work on the case that became the case that we're here for now, did you communicate with Agent Balance by email?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you communicate with other FBI agents by email?
Yes, ma'am.
And did that relate to the investigation of the scene and later the investigation of Bryan Kohberger?
Certainly, yes, ma'am.
Were those communications that assisted you in preparing affidavits and search warrants to carry out your duties in the case?
I do not recall.
But you recall the emails themselves.
I recall sending emails to FBI agents, yes, but
And-
specifics though.
And receiving them?
Yes, ma'am.
Where are those emails now?
All emails that Moscow PD is aware of have been turned over to the prosecutor's office.
Your Honor, if I can have just a minute.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions for now, but I think you have a couple of exhibits on the front end. If you don't need them for us, maybe I'll take them back.
Well, hold on. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I'll.
Yes, okay. I thought you were just stepping off, so. Denny?
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
Morning, sir.
Good work.
To your knowledge, has all the evidence in Moscow Police Department's possession been turned over to the state for us to discover?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you facilitated the defense visiting MPD to review the physical evidence in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately how many times have you done that?
I had to guess, I'd say 6.
Now, let's talk specifically about this video surveillance. Explain to me the process for collecting video surveillance.
So in this investigation, the way that played out was we directed the investigators to go into the community and collect any available surveillance footage there was. Once they had done that, they were tasked with bringing it back to Moscow Police Department, placing it in the digital forensics lab, and then writing a supplemental report on where they collected that information. That was the process.
Do you know how many agencies helped in this video canvassing?
Certainly the FBI and the Idaho State Police. I'm not sure if any other agencies helped. I don't know.
Do you know approximately how many agents were out collecting video?
easily over a dozen. I don't know the specific number, but
Isn't it true that investigators collected video surveillance from approximately 79 businesses
yes, ma'am.
and approximately 10 residences? So let's talk about the areas that Ms. Taylor mentioned. Isn't it true that there's other surveillance video capturing the Moscow-Pullman Highway, specifically on the way to Pullman?
Yes, ma'am. There's-
Isn't it true we've turned over video for banks
Yes,
on
ma'am.
that highway? Isn't it true we've turned over surveillance for stores on that highway?
Yes,
Isn't it true we've turned over video for gas stations?
yes,
Now let's talk about the Troy Highway towards Troy. Isn't it true we've turned over surveillance video for fast food restaurants,
yes,
gas stations?
yes,
And now US 95 towards Coeur d'Alene. Isn't it true we've turned over surveillance video for hardware stores,
yes,
gas stations?
yes,
Now, what about US 95 towards Lewiston? Isn't it true we've turned over surveillance video for gas stations,
yes,
as well as apartments?
yes.
Now let's move to your PC affidavit. Can you explain to me what did the investigation look like during the time that you were writing that affidavit?
So as I said, the command center was established at the Moscow Police Department. The command center consisted of myself and numerous partners from the FBI and the Idaho State Police. We were all co-located there at Moscow PD. We also had individual sections assigned to do various tasks, collect video, conduct interviews, so on and so forth. The majority of those people were also co-located at the Moscow Police Department. So as the process for developing this affidavit began, those people would just come into the command center and relay information that was deemed to be critical or important. The reason for that was to shorten the chain of information to make sure that the folks, myself and my partners in the command post, got the clearest view of what the investigators on the ground were actually retrieving and learning as this went on. As they relay that to me, I input that into the affidavit.
And is that standard to rely on what other investigators tell you when you're applying for warrants?
Absolutely.
And is that what you did?
Yes, ma'am.
And is what you relied upon detailed in your probable cause affidavit?
Yes.
Now, talking about the timing advance records, are you aware that AT&T didn't provide timing advance records in December of 2022?
I do not remember.
Are you aware that they did not start providing those records until May of 2023?
Objection leading.
Cross-examination.
It is overall. Go ahead.
I'll re-ask. Are you aware that AT&T did not start providing those records until May of 2023?
Yes.
I don't have anything further.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Thanks. Let's start there. May of 2023. Do you have timing advance records now from May of 2023?
I would have to direct you to Detective Mowery to answer that question. Don't know.
Okay. Did you write a new warrant for them in May of 2023?
I do not recall.
If you included them in two separate warrants in December of 2022, but they didn't provide them, why would you do that?
It was the language that was suggested to me to write the affidavit, so.
Language suggested by an FBI agent who's an expert in the field?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. And do you know if he saw the timing advance reports?
I do not know.
All right. Now, those first and second AT&T warrants were how many hours from receiving the return on the first one until the second one was given to Judge Marshall at 4:45?
I do not remember.
Not very many hours, though. Would that be fair?
Likely not.
I want to talk a little bit more about the video and what's been turned over and what hasn't been turned over to us. And I want to focus a little bit on South US 95. Do you recall that south of Moscow on US 95 is the path that you put in your search warrant and affidavit alleging that Bryan Kohberger left Moscow going south on US 95.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And are you aware that one of the videos that you gave us, the coffee shop that they are on South 95, that leaving Moscow, you'd have to pass that covers 5 a.m. to 6 a.m.
I do not recall the time frame for that.
And so the time frame in these videos would matter, right?
Certainly.
The time frame in the videos to be meaningful would need to cover a time that surrounds the allegations against Mr. Kohberger. Is that fair to say?
You could say that, yes.
Okay. And are you aware that Watson Kari Construction had a video, and that also has a very limited time frame, like 5 a.m., just 1 hour of video also?
Sounds vaguely familiar, yes.
And that's also south on Highway 95, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And the one we talked about today, Monday's machine that nobody could find, that clearly was given to Moscow Police Department, that's also south on 95.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I understand that you had a lot of help on canvassing and collecting things. There was a lot to do. But as the lead agent and the lead department, is there some kind of inventory of these videos, like a general inventory that would help me know what you have and why you don't have the relevant timeframes?
The inventory that would be most useful to you is the inventory of evidence that has been booked into the Moscow Police Department. That's the inventory.
And I did come see the evidence. That's fair. I did come see the evidence. We didn't watch videos together though, did we?
No, ma'am.
And would you agree that that evidence is on thumb drives with stickies on papers that tell us different things, but not like an inventory of what's on each thumb drive?
I am not aware of an inventory of each individual thumb drive.
Okay. So for us to do that together would take some days to inventory it all together. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's my best way to try to find this Monday's machine
Certainly.
and Watson Kari Construction.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's it. Thanks.
All right, Ms. Taylor, anything to follow up on that? Ms. Jennings?
Oh, just one second. Thank you. I just want to clarify what's in your probable cause affidavit. Does your probable cause affidavit state that Kohberger or a white Elantra went on US 95 south of Moscow?
No, it's not.
Okay, what does it state?
Memory serves, it states that the next time, well, it states that a vehicle was seen leaving the area of the crime scene, McKinney Road, leaving via Lawerence Drive, which heads south from that area, and then terminates on Conestoga and Moose River Drive. That's what the probable cause affidavit states.
And to your knowledge, are there other paths of travel south of Moscow besides US 95?
Yes.
And what's that other route?
I believe the one that was referenced in the affidavit goes from Moose River Drive, which turns into Sand Road at the state line, not the Idaho-Washington state line. That road continues westbound until south of Pullman and eventually leads north into Pullman at Bishop Boulevard, if memory serves.
And does that path of travel go by Watson Kari Construction?
I do not believe it does.
Did you attempt to obtain surveillance on that path of travel that doesn't go through 95?
Yes, we did.
And were you successful?
I don't believe we were.
I don't have anything further.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Are you testifying that Mr. Kohberger did not use Highway 95 south of Moscow on November 13th?
I'm testifying that there are various routes that a person could take south of Moscow To include Highway 95, there are also several others.
Which one does your map depict?
I believe the map starts well south of Moscow, or more towards Genesee, and there is the line that starts there. However, I would direct you to the paragraph at the beginning of the map that says this is a possible route to travel between the two locations.
So you're just not sure.
Yes, ma'am?
Okay. That would include then Highway 95 south of Moscow.
Yes, ma'am.
And that would include other possible routes.
Yes, ma'am.
How many video surveillance attempts did you make to get video from businesses or homes on all of those routes?
I do not recall, but it continued for some time, attempting to find additional video footage.
What did you find?
Nothing to my recollection.
Not one video depicting the car.
To my memory, no.
Good enough, thanks.
All right. Thank you. Okay, great. Can this, Detective, Payne be excused at this point?
He can be, thank you.
Okay, any objections? All right. Thank you, sir. Thanks for being here. You can, you're free to stay or leave.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Your Honor, we call Syray.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth and the penalty of perjury?
I do. Right. Thank you, Sue. So you go ahead and have a seat there, and then please state your name and spell your last.
I, Ray, R-A-Y.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Will you tell us what you do?
I have a handful of different jobs, but primarily for my role here, I do a lot of consulting, analysis, and evaluating geolocation data as it pertains to mobile devices.
Let's talk about how you got to that place where you, by consultation on devices and geolocation.
Okay.
What background led you to this job?
I started with a law enforcement background. I started my law enforcement career in 1995 in Arizona. Started working with the first set of cell phone records in that capacity in 97, late 1997. There wasn't a lot of training. Obviously, cell phone technology and the use of that in criminal investigations was very new and novel at that time. So most of my early training came directly from the carriers. If I was working a case with Verizon or AT&T, I would work directly with Verizon or AT&T engineers to understand the records, what they meant, how to map them, how to interpret it. In 2000, I started a very small police department in Arizona. In 2000, I transferred to a much larger police department in the Phoenix area. When I made that transition, I took more of an investigative role. I was previously a patrol officer. That investigative role, I started with a DEA task force where I worked with drug narcotic interdictions, and the primary role there was working with cell phone records. So I had some more training experience in that capacity. In 2001, late 2001, I left that position and I went into a full-time investigations position. I started with sex crimes and child crimes. Again, using cell phone records and attending what training was available. Again, most of that is from the carriers directly. About 2004, I moved out of sex crimes and child crimes into persons crimes or violent crimes. So any type of a dangerous or violent crime against a person. Continuing to work with cell phone records and attending what training I could. In 2008, I was promoted to sergeant and I was immediately put into a homicide robbery sergeant's position where I stayed until 2010. Around 2004, I started doing a lot of work with cell site simulators, and that is a piece of equipment that allows you to physically go out in the field and find a mobile device. In a very brief summary, it's the ability to create a fake cell tower that is mobile, it's in a vehicle, And if I can analyze your phone records and determine a rough area that you're at, I can put this mobile platform in that area. Your phone will register to it and I can physically track the phones. It's in courtroom, it's in a bedroom, wherever it may be. In 2007, our agency purchased that equipment. So prior to that, I was working with other agencies looking for devices using it. 2007, we purchased our own equipment. That purchase also prompted more training. There was a company, it's owned by Boeing. They came in and I had 80 hours at that point specific to cellular network engineering, how to go out and actually conduct these surveys to understand how a particular cell phone network works in a particular area, and how to replicate, how to create a cell site that looks legitimate in that area. I worked with that company for a number of years in doing that, hundreds of hours worth of back and forth working, actually going out in the field and doing this. In 2010, I had an opportunity to go to Afghanistan as an advisor in charge of an undercover Afghan police team that targeted IED cells. And again, we would look at different types of technology that we could leverage in doing that. I came back in late 2010, early 2011, and went back to the police department. In 2012, our department created a position that this was a full-time position. Now that's all I did was track phones pretty much every day, using cell site simulators, using phone records, whatever technology we could leverage. Because of the lack of training that was available when I was a younger officer, in 2007, I started a training company. At the time, it was called Phoenix Training. And I created a training company to provide law enforcement training, specifically as it relates to cell phone records. I've been providing that training from 2007 up to about 2013 now. I was really frustrated with the lack of software and training available to law enforcement. It's very complex and clunky, for lack of a better term. So I began researching and teaching myself how to do some basic computer programming. And I wrote a program that I could take phone records from any carrier in the United States and I could put it in this program and it would immediately map hundreds, if not thousands of connections. It was pretty unique at the time. There just wasn't a lot of options out there that was doing the geolocation. There was a lot of analytics to who's calling who and how often they call that person. But specifically to put it on a map for detailed geolocation data, there was a big gap in the market. It worked. It worked really, really well. And at the time, because we were tracking phones in the field, it gave me this very unique opportunity where I could use a search warrant, get phone records, analyze the phone records, come up with a hypothesis that this phone is most likely Thursday at 2 a.m. going to be in this neighborhood, and then physically go to that location to recover the phone. And then I could evaluate, was I right? Was I wrong? Do I need to tweak something? Mid-2013, our agency was assisting a lot of other agencies because we had, for lack of a better term, we had progressed significantly on our ability to find the phones. I had a lot of agencies asking me for a copy of my mapping program, and I was just about at 20 years at that point. I realized maybe it's time to go do something else. So in May of 2014, I retired from the police department and I started a company called ZETX, Z-E-T-X. And we offered a couple different things. So we had the mapping program that I just described. Obviously, when I'm running it on my laptop, it can be a little clunky. It doesn't have to be perfect. When we started business, we actually hired computer engineers to come in and take what I had written and scale it to a national platform. So we offered the mapping services, which was both real-time and historical. We took that original training class that I had built and we scaled it out. So we had a basic 40-hour that would just give you the nuts and bolts of how to look at phone records, what they need, what type of records to obtain. We also started a subject matter expert course. It was one of the first courses in the country where law enforcement could actually come in and become certified as subject matter experts in this field. Did some training courses as well that we created on drive testing, so the ability to go out and scan and monitor cellular networks. Because of those two features, my job duties changed dramatically, where I found myself consulting with law enforcement daily, sometimes multiple times in a day, on cases, very similar to this case, where I would have a law enforcement agency that's using our product or has attended our training that would call me for some type of review or analysis. And I've lost count. It's thousands and thousands of cases. To put that in perspective for some just general numbers, I sold this company in 2021. At that time, around 2021, 2022, the system had mapped over 2 billion phone calls in the United States. We were seeing thousands of uploads a week. We had created this program in 2014 that if any law enforcement agency in the country called us because they had some type of a crime, we would overnight them a drive test scanner, which gives them the ability to go out and do a forensic examination of cell tower networks. It was no cost. We ate all of the cost of this. So we paid for the scanners. Initially we paid for the shipping. And the idea there is we wanted to create a national tower database that would have just a collection of drive tests. I want to say we have over 3 million towers in that database today that have been scanned or measured in some capacity. I am unaware of any other database in the world like it. And we use that to feed the mapping platform to increase the accuracy of the mapping. Something that we did that was very unique with our company is we actually provided an estimated coverage area. So instead of just saying this phone connected to this cell site and the antenna points north, we would give the person doing the analysis a general idea of where that phone could possibly be within a radius. We were the only ones doing it when we did this. Since then, since 2014, more recently, since about 2020, pretty much the rest of the industry has adopted, if not the same standard, a very similar standard. So the company we were using to do the drive test data is a company by the name of Rohde, R-O-H-D-E, and Schwarz, S-C-H-W-A-R-Z. They're a German company out of Munich. They've adopted the way that we were doing some of the ranging. The FBI CAS team has adopted that, has actually brought that tower density is what is the general term for it, and it's now featured in the CAS BIDS program. So through the years with training, I've probably been involved in training 30, maybe 35,000 law enforcement officers from around the country. We had about 650 law enforcement agencies within the United States. At some point, all of the federal agencies have used our products in their training. And I've done quite a bit of consulting internationally as well. Towards the end of that period, we started working more with Rohde and Schwarz. Rohde and Schwarz decided that they wanted to look at the ability to implement a cell site simulator in the United States. They had one for Europe. They were considering doing it for the United States. So they sent me their first one for the United States, and I worked with their engineers for about a year, testing it, reviewing it, improving it. So another several hundred hours there. I've tried to figure out how many of these missions, if you will, of going out and finding a phone or looking at phone records, and it is literally thousands and thousands of hours at this point. I can't tell you specific number. But that would be the background.
Sounds like your background is mostly in law enforcement, and then you moved into a specialty with cell phones, cell towers, drive testing, radio waves, all of that kind of thing.
That would be correct.
Through that and through the training of other officers to do this work and to use your program, have you testified as an expert in this field?
I have. If it's not 100 times, it's right there near it. Roughly 100 times in both state and federal.
And have you been qualified as an expert in state courts,
Yes.
in federal courts?
Yes.
How about Idaho?
Don't think I have in Idaho. I've consulted on a lot of cases in Idaho, but I don't think I've ever had testimony in Idaho.
This your first time then?
I believe it is.
Generally, when you work, and I'm talking about when you've done your consulting work or worked with an agency to do what you do to review the records and to analyze the data, do you usually work with the defense?
This is the first time I've ever testified for defense.
Fair to say you usually are a prosecution witness?
That is a very fair statement.
Well, here you are, and you're working with us in Mr. Kohberger's case. What's your role in this case?
trying to conduct an analysis of all of the geolocation data. At this point, still focused primarily on Mr. Kohberger's device, ultimately all devices, but any geolocation data, which is the ability to look at a specific area, whatever range or size that might be at a specific time, and put some type of accuracy and reliability to a phone's travel. Maybe it's stagnant, when it's moving, when it's not moving, when it's off, it's on, those type of things. But specifically as it relates to network, so the cellular network or a Wi-Fi network, I am not a forensic digital guy. I don't get into cell extractions. I'm not looking at the metadata on the phone. I'm looking at it very much as a network tool.
If I can make a rough distinction, you're not the person that's going to tell me who they called and which Facebook groups they might be a part of. You're not going to look at the data from the phone, like the photographs, but you're going to tell me the places this phone went and how it was used while it went somewhere.
Kind of. Let me clean that up a little bit. I will look first at where I believe a phone went, where it traveled, how it got there, how long it took, possible routes. And then to your point, I call it cooperative data. I'm then going to seek out all that data you just talked about to say, okay, well, we have these 3 photographs, we have this piece of surveillance video, we have these 4 receipts. And I'm going to overlay it with my analysis so that I can corroborate the analysis accurate. Or maybe we see activity associated with that person and the phone's not there. Does that person just not have the phone, or is part of our analysis wrong? Maybe surveillance details wrong. We don't know. So eventually I will get back to that data you're talking about, but I'm not the guy that's going to go out and extract that data.
Would it be fair to say that that's data that you would use in a final analysis as it comes in from other sources, that you're the go-to for me to understand how a phone works with a tower and how it moves between towers if the phone's in motion somewhere?
Yes, 100%.
You talked a little bit about drive test data or drive testing, and that being part of the company that you developed and part of the work that you've done. Is that helpful in understanding the ultimate picture?
Depending on the type of records we're dealing with, it can be very helpful. When we're looking at just basic call detail records, CDRs, a lot of times we're just getting connections to a particular cell site, and we can say a PSI of that cell site. Sometimes the frequencies that are used. Drive testing is really the only way to get a little bit more specific with where that phone may be. But more importantly, we can start to rule out areas we know it's not by drive testing. So just think of drive testing as a forensic evaluation of the actual cellular network in a particular area.
Fair enough. Are you familiar with AT&T records?
I am intimately familiar with AT&T records.
How long do you think you've been working with AT&T records?
28 years.
In our case that we're here on today, have you reviewed any AT&T records that relate to Mr. Kohberger?
I have.
What have you reviewed?
What AT&T refers to as their regular CDRs, which is a report AU as an atom union. I have identified the report CT as in Charles Tom, which is the subscriber information. There's a really weird name called Locabor, which is AT&T's attempt to estimate general locations using latitude and longitude. I don't want to say GPS because it is different than GPS. I believe I've looked at some ping data from December. For the most part, that's what I've reviewed so far.
Have you looked at 2 separate AT&T warrant returns from December 23rd, 2022?
I have.
In your experience with working with AT&T records, is it common or uncommon to have 2 warrants, one that relies on the content of the first in the same day?
It's not uncommon to see a small time period that produces results that would increase the desire, the need for a bigger time period of records. Seeing that entire process happen twice in the same day is extremely rare.
Well, the first AT&T record, we called it today the 48-hour AT&T record of Bryan's call detail record. If you were to take that and do an analysis on a call detail record, how long would that be?
Depends on the analysis, so I'll qualify that answer with looking at what was put into the second warrant that shows us at least parts of that analysis to include a route that was identified. To do it reliably and feel comfortable that I'm accurate, at least 3 hours, and that's if you know what you're doing and you have all the tools at your disposal. Arguably, you could spend half a day or more doing that very easily.
To do that, do you just take these records, printed copy, and know what's on there, or do you have to do something with those records?
You would have to use some type of a mapping platform, software, and you would take the digital copy, which is typically a text file, you would import it into that program, which would then map everything. But if I'm going to use those results, search warrant affidavit, for example, there's a process that I'm going to go through to confirm the accuracy, because in theory, if I'm wrong, the entire linchpin of that case is now hinged on this affidavit that I wrote. So before I commit to swearing out to an affidavit, hey, this is what the phone is doing, X, Y, and Z, there's a further process of just mapping it to validate it. In this case, there's a lot of time distance measurements that need to be performed that can be extremely time consuming. There's some ulterior issues that come up with how that phone is interacting with other cell sites that needs to be analyzed. Again, saying that a very qualified, competent investigator spending half a day just coming up with that basic summary is very reasonable.
In that half a day, you would put that record into a computer program and a map would be produced?
Correct.
What other information besides that call detail record would you need to do this analysis?
In this case, I would want the call detail records. I would want the locabor, it's LOCAVR. And I would want the regional cell tower list from AT&T.
Does AT&T generally provide that regional cell tower list inside of its record that it produces pursuant to the search warrant?
No, I would actually say by policy, they do not. It's a very large file. It typically does not transmit very well to government email. So they would direct users of where they could go online and download it.
And have you looked at this record, the 48-hour AT&T search warrant record, the return on that?
I have.
Did that include the regional tower list?
It did not.
Okay. So if you are doing this analysis, you put CDR records into a computer program, you put a regional tower list into the computer program, what does it produce?
The CDRs would show me cell sites that the phone connected to. In this case, even within the 48 hours, there's hundreds of those cell sites. So it would take a while to really look at that. The regional cell site list would show me the cell towers that the phone's not interacting with, which can be just as important.
Does it spit out product to you, or does it create something that you can reference to write your next warrant?
Depending on which mapping platform you're using, they all create some type of a map that the person doing the analysis on can interact with, and they can change things, they can save things, they can create work product. Depending on that platform, that's saved in different types of maps, but yes, all of them would have some type of a mapping platform.
Okay. Would that be consistent with this past draft that we heard about earlier?
It's my opinion that Corporal Payne probably is misusing some terms there. I don't see any possibility of the FBI CAS team producing a CAS draft report on the 23rd. I think he's probably mistaken that he saw some type of CAS work product, which would be this map, before they export all those results into a report. So I believe that he probably saw some mapping through a mapping platform. It would really surprise me if there was a physical report. It would be completely out of character.
In that first AT&T report, did you, or request search warrant and affidavit, did you see the request for advanced timing reports?
I did, it's in both search warrants.
Did you get a copy of that in either return?
I have not seen any timing data in this case.
In December of 2022, did AT&T have this advanced timing report?
They absolutely did.
Was it something that they could produce?
It absolutely was.
And in May of 2023, but how's it different to that May of 2023?
Prior to May of 2023, only certain agencies were receiving this timing report, the FBI being one of them. What was referenced earlier about the May 23 date, that is when AT&T started offering the same type of reports. It's a little different, but it's the basic timing report to state and local law enforcement as well. But prior to that date, state and local law enforcement would have to leverage these reports through federal agencies that had access to them.
Let's talk about the return on the second AT&T warrant. Did that have the tower list, the regional tower list in it?
It did not.
Did it have call detail records?
It did.
What time span?
I believe it's from June 23rd of 2022. The historical was as of the date of December 23rd, but there was also a real-time PIN register that was added that extended, I want to say, to the end of December, maybe very first of January.
What's a real-time PIN register?
So the second search warrant asked for a couple of different things. Historical records going back to June 23rd to the current date, which was December 23rd. The second piece that was asked for is real-time data from the network, which is commonly referred to as a PIN register, or trap and trace. And it's the ability of law enforcement to monitor network connections in real time. So as that phone connects to the network for certain reasons, I can see those connections. It's not a wiretap. I can't hear anything. I can't see content, but I can tell the phone is connected to a particular cell tower. There's also what's referred to as ping data, and that's going to be AT&T's estimation of where the phone is at, and that's provided by latitude and longitude, and that comes in every 15 minutes.
What is the purpose of one of those devices?
I should probably clarify. The third thing was the authorization for a cell site simulator. So it was a combination of all of these. Just as a matter of policy, and I think pretty much every law enforcement agency in the world has adopted this if they can. To use the cell site simulator, you want to see a real-time feed of the phone. Otherwise, you're driving in circles where the phone may not be. So it gives law enforcement the ability to have a general understanding of where a phone is operating or functioning. And then I can use the cell site simulator to do it. There's a number of reasons an agency might do this. This search warrant actually says they were requesting this because they were trying to locate where Mr. Kohberger was.
Going to the understanding what's happening right now, is that used so that you don't just know where the phone was 5 minutes ago, but you know where it is right now?
Within a time period, it's not a perfect system. There is a little bit of a delay and the information comes in intermittently. So it's not a real-time feed of giving constant evaluation of where that phone is. But if you know what you're looking at and you've done it long enough, you get a pretty good idea.
I heard you say that this is to try to find out where Mr. Kohberger is. In the information that supported this warrant, didn't they already know where Mr. Kohberger was?
I reviewed a lot of documents that clearly state not only did they know where he was, they had a surveillance team with eyes on. So yes, it would be unusual for an agency to request this type of equipment. And I need to qualify that. This truck driving around is about $1 million. It's not something you just park in the garage at night. It's a very expensive resource. It's a very technical resource that requires a lot of training and skill to use properly. So typically when it's used, it is used for, hey, we don't know where this person is at and we need to find them. And to be very honest, I don't have an issue with that part. I've used it thousands of times. It's a good tool. It's a great tool. However, if I know where a subject is and I'm physically watching him, it's probably disingenuous for me to get a search warrant justifying it that I need to find him.
Makes sense. Thank you. I want to switch gears and talk about the CAST Biz program.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the CAST Biz program?
I am.
Why?
I've worked with a lot of agencies that have used it and accessed it. So I've worked on cases where we've used different mapping platforms to do kind of a compare and contrast as a peer review. So they would create a work product, we would create a work product, and then we would check each other's work. Because at the end of the day, we're just looking for the accuracy. We want to see if there's any errors in that. I would say I probably have worked with the CAST Biz reports several dozen times, maybe as many as 50. I'm aware of some of the updates they've made. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm aware that they have added a feature that you can now input tower density, so you can create these estimated ranges, if you will. And I'm very familiar with the basic settings that you have certain controls you can do, like time zone. What time zone am I going to have it? Am I going to use the coverage density? Am I going to save my work? Am I going to just exit the program? I physically have seen those features a number of times.
As it relates to this particular case, have you had a chance to look at any exhibits prepared by Detective Mowery using the CAST Biz program?
Yes, but I should clarify. One of them I'm pretty familiar with. I believe it's State Exhibit 48 that was used for the grand jury. The others I had never seen until I believe it was last week. So I'm probably gonna have to look at those if you're gonna ask me questions on those. But State's 48, I'm pretty familiar with.
I want to ask you a question about that. I'll ask you some other questions about the records we received last week. I'm going to have you handed what was admitted last week as states are, just my copy of it so that we know what we're talking about here.
Okay.
I'm curious about what was needed to go into CAST Biz to create that.
So when I open the CAST Biz program, I have to input what I'm going to refer to as source data. So let me define source data is any data that is in electronic format, typically a text file, that the CAST Biz program is going to link to this mapping session and use that source data to create the images we're seeing. I can tell you right off the bat, without a doubt, this one is linked to two different source data. One is going to be a set of CDR records, so the regular AT&T CDRs. And then this particular exhibit would require the regional AT&T tower list, which is a text file that contains all of the cell site locations, most likely be Western Washington, Idaho, and Eastern Washington, Idaho, and Western Montana is typically that region. But there's no way this map was created without the AT&T tower list. It's physically impossible.
Is the AT&T tower list, was that contained in the call detail records that were obtained by search warrants relating to Mr. Kohberger?
It was not.
All right. And in the CAST Biz program, when you input the CDR call detail records and you input the tower list, does that program create any type of log?
It does, and I want to make the record really clear on what I'm testifying to, because it can get kind of confusing when we start talking about different versions. The CAST Biz program offers two styles of mapping. I can just default to a normal size, what they're going to refer to as a wedge shape, which is representing the sector the device connected to. If I was doing that, all I need is the AT&T records, because the AT&T CDRs actually have the tower information that's required for that mapping. As soon as I change that feature, though, to add coverage areas, the estimated coverage areas, and now these little wedge shapes or these sectors are all different sizes, the CAST program has to be linked to a tower list that has location of all of those towers. That's the only way the program knows how to size the cell sites. So I just want to clarify, if I'm mapping the CDRs without coverage areas, all I need is the CDRs. If I'm mapping the coverage areas in the CASVIS program, they have to have a tower list. This one, I can see 3 different sectors. 2 of them, if anybody sees this exhibit, just to make the record really clear, they're really hard to see. One of them is just under the N as in Nora, under the word Pullman. The other one is right by the L in Pullman. But they're different sizes. And that tells me right off the bat that the AT&T tower list was used.
And why are they different sizes? My thinking, please.
Cell tower density, we see a great big sector right in the middle of this map, and I'm not familiar with the area here. It's basically south of Pullman and south of Moscow, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Not a lot of cell towers out there, so one tower covers a very large area. Then the other 2 are going to be in Pullman. It's kind of hard to see on this map, but I believe they are going to be ones that are on Washington State University campus. A lot more cell towers, the coverage is much smaller. So it's just a way to look at tower density to kind of estimate how far certain towers may connect to a phone where others may have a very short range.
And is it based on that difference in towers that causes you to know that a certain type of tower report was used?
Yeah, it is a basic algorithm that uses tower density, and the only way to determine tower density is to have a list that has all of the towers, not just the ones that were used by the cell phone.
Okay. Do we have the list of the tower list that was used by Detective Mowery in developing that exhibit?
Detective Mowery stated he did not use a tower list to create this exhibit, so no, but I'm not sure how to answer that other than I haven't seen one.
Should it be there?
It is physically impossible to create this map without it.
If you had the logs from the CASVIS program, would that give you more information about what was used?
It would. We would need the CASVIS program as well. The logs are saving certain settings, and it's a JSON format, which is just a software language. We could load that JSON file into the CASVIS program, and for the most part, we could replicate exactly what was done.
If I understand that, to turn it around, in order to replicate that and to see what was done, you would need a CASVIS program. Is that right?
Correct, and preferably the same version that was used.
And you need a JSON file that was made by Detective Mouth. Is that right?
Correct, and depending on where this software program is, we would probably need the source data again because it may not be automatically linked. Anybody who did PowerPoint 10 years ago, you make a PowerPoint on one computer, you save it on a thumb drive, you go to a different computer, all the links are broken. It could create a situation like that. So you would probably need the original source data as well, just to be sure.
What's the original source data?
In this case, it would be the AT&T CDRs and the cell tower, the regional cell tower list.
From that time?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, no, if we're trying to recreate this work, this is where it gets a little bit complex. We would need the exact AT&T tower list that Mowery used but didn't use, which makes it really difficult because AT&T updates these on a fairly regular basis. If he used a November list and I use an April list, the results could be different.
Okay. Why would the results be different and given the month of the video?
AT&T could have added or subtracted cell sites in the area, which would change the tower density. They could also reconfigure those cell sites, so maybe they point different directions. Given the rural area, 2 or 3 months, I don't think you're going to see much of a change, but it's always possible. So if we're talking about recreating this exhibit exactly the way it was, we would need not just the regional tower list, we would need to know which version of the regional tower list he used.
Is that generally why people in your field save their work?
We're talking best practices 101. We're creating a work product that is going to be used in a forensic nature, not showing how an extraction is done, not showing the source data that I use to create an exhibit. It happens, but for the most part, it's unheard of, especially somebody who is a subject matter expert in digital forensics. I won't say I haven't seen it, but it is rare.
Thank you. Let's move on and talk about the CAST draft. have you
I'm sorry, Ms. Bailey. The passes report.
draft? Have you,
Can I ask how much longer on this? Because we're 90 minutes. I need to give the court order break. But if you're going to finish, in 5 or 10 minutes, that's probably fine.
Your Honor, I would say we probably have 15 or 20 minutes or so. If the court wants to do a break, we can, or
Yeah, let's take a recess. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Relax.